Welcome to the VET S.O.S podcast. Remember, don't drown in the sea of transition. Grab the VET S.O.S Lifeline. As a bourbon drinker for years, I was intrigued by the name of our next guest here, Keith. We're joined by Mr. Whiskey, former sailor and podcast host. This is going to be a fun conversation, though. This is a great young man who's doing some wonderful things, and just can't wait to jump into this conversation, hear everything he's got going on. Of course, celebrating sobriety together there, Keith. I'm here with my partner. How you doing today, brother?
I'm doing great. And I think it's two guys who used to pour the whiskey and now just tell the stories. I'm glad that we're talking about building people up instead of drinking ourselves down. And I'm really looking forward to this episode. How you doing, Sean, in your sobriety?
I am doing fantastic. A journey that was way overdue.
Also does come to that realization. Absolutely.
Yep. Absolutely. All right. So let's jump right into this. We got Mr. Whiskey. He is a U.S. Navy veteran and founder of Couple of Nukes, a self-improvement company and resource. Through this, he has become a podcaster, author, speaker, comedian, preacher, and entrepreneur whose work focuses on suicide prevention, addiction recovery, military life, mental health, relationships, and the prevention and awareness of domestic violence, sexual violence, and human trafficking. The mission is simple: protect, provide, and serve. First of all, I love your heart. I love everything you're trying to do here and all the work you're putting in. So happy you joined us today, brother. How you doing today, Mr. Whiskey?
I'm doing well. Like I mentioned to you beforehand, I'm in Japan. So it's slowly approaching midnight here. And I just got back home 5 minutes ago through the door from adventuring all day. It was, like 108 degrees. I was in a full suit, and I at least you can't smell me through the podcast. That would be, everyone would be grabbing a lifeline for sure.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, thank you so much for joining us, man. And your story is fantastic. You've been on a couple of our shows talking about different things. And every time I get to sit and talk with you or listen to you, man, I learn something that's just fantastic. So, so happy that you're here today. Before we get into what you're doing with Couple of Nukes, let's go ahead and talk about your transition out of the service. How did that go?
For sure. I think like a lot of veterans, especially the younger ones who are hot to trot to get out, we have this mindset of, whenever I asked a lot of my friends who were getting out as well, what are you going to do? I don't care what I do as long as it's not this. And in the moment, it seems great. It seems great when whatever you're doing, you're like, as long as I get out of here, I don't care if it's, working a cashier. I don't care if it's flipping burgers. I just don't want to be in the Navy. I don't want to be in the Army. I don't want to be in the Marines. And a lot of us really don't make a plan. We had little fragments floating around our head, because of our certifications or our degrees or whatever it is. We'll just pick something up, probably $100,000. Who cares? Especially nuclear side. There's a lot of, nonchalantness there. And a lot of my friends jumped job to job. Doing some horrible stuff. A lot of them were like, hey, you know what? Everything I did in the military isn't what I'm doing out of the military, not what I want to do. And now I'm just a regular person. I'm basically a high school graduate who is disciplined, And so I think a lot of us don't properly plan. And even when I fell into podcasting, I didn't research. And that's what I regret. I didn't research, how's this different for veterans? I wasn't thinking about that. I wasn't give me this count, give me discount. I wasn't that kind of person. But there was certain fees, some of them hundreds of dollars, that I could have had waived as a veteran, as a military member in this state or doing this kind of work. And so I really regret not planning and not researching. Part of that is on the military. I will say, for separation, they pick some random person who already has 15 other responsibilities and says, hey, help this person separate. And they give them a checkbox list. And as long as they fill in those check boxes, they'll even say, are you fine if I just put a check in this? Well, you want to get out. So you're like, yes, put a check in it. Check all of them. I don't care. I don't need to plan my finances. I don't need you to x-ray my bones. I don't need to see dental. I floss. Most military members probably don't. But, you get the ordeal. We're just hot to trot to go. And I think a lot of us need to just slow down and say, hey, whether it's been 3 years, 6 years, 20 years, yes, we want to get out. But we should build a strong foundation so that we don't get out. And now this freedom and this brand new life that we've been chasing is just a crapshoot that leads us to drinking, to depression, to anxiety, to financial instability. A lot of veterans fall into that because, again, we just want to be out. And we rather be out and struggling until we are struggling and we're like, all right, I shouldn't have done this. To the point that I've had friends call me, Mr. Whiskey, I think I'm going to go back in. Man, you just spent 6 years telling me you can't wait to get out. You had the countdown on your phone. You had it on a watch on your arm, and you were looking at it every hour like, man, it's been another hour. We're another hour closer. And now you're going to go back in. Man, identity, stability, just all these things that I didn't plan and just threw away. And now I don't know how to find them for myself. And I'm lucky because, everything lined up for me where it kind of said, hey, we got you covered. But there's a lot of veterans who don't have that fall into place, who don't have community, who don't figure it out. And they suffer for a long time.
That's just, you spoke a lot of truth there. There's a lot of all of that going on. And it's sad, and hopefully, we continue to beat this drum. Planning is really key, and if you do the planning and you have the time, you can do amazing things in transition. But it's got to be there. So let's jump into Couple of Nukes. I know it's a self-improvement company, but I also know it's a podcast. So what came first? Did you create this company and then decide to do a podcast with that? Or did you create the podcast and then eventually turn it into a company to do other things?
Well, and tell our listeners too, the name Mr. Whiskey, like, is that like his real name or is that a moniker?
Sure.
Where's that come from?
It's all tied together. So all these questions overlap. So I started the podcast when I was still active duty military. I was traveling 16 hours a weekend to see my then fiance at the time, within the bounds of the Liberty radius, of course. And, driving 16 hours, y'all know, music just got to a point where I couldn't listen to it anymore. And I was reckless. I wouldn't encourage it. I would pull 2 all-nighters straight from work, and going into work, I would you never fall asleep behind the wheel. You just wake up in another lane. And I did that many times, and it was dangerous. But I had the red glasses on the rose tinted glasses. I was madly in love, and 16 hours a weekend just to see her for maybe a day or two. I was driving back and forth. And so I was like, what can I do to make this time productive? I hate just, 16 hours of just wasted time. Music got boring. And I said, what can I do that's like watching a YouTube video, but the video is not draining my phone battery? And I said, podcasting, some kind of audio only thing. Didn't know anything about podcasting at the time. I said, do people actually like listen to these? And so I found one from these YouTubers I used to watch, started listening to that. One of them had started a comedy with their father. So you had this Los Angeles based, like millennial liberal, and then you had this very, right-wing, God-fearing, super Southern man, and they had a comedy podcast together because of the differences and just exploring each other's lives. And I liked it. And one day, a couple of nukes were sitting around, and nukes are what they call us for shorthand as nuclear operators in the Navy. And a couple of us are sitting around talking. And we're some of the smartest people in the world and some of the strangest, right? It goes hand in hand. The smarter you are, the stranger you are. And we were like lawyers, and our conversations were so articulated. They were so focused. They were so legalistic and the most minimal points, and so smart. And we were having this ridiculous conversation about a snail meme about, you push this button, you get $1 million immortality, but there's a snail that will hunt you for eternity trying to kill you. And so we were nuking out how to like stop this snail. And I was like, you know what? I bet you there's no podcast out there that is a couple of nuclear operators talking like the way we do. How unique would that be? This could be a huge thing. This could brand very well. This could grow. But I jokingly call the show Just a Nuke, and that's myself, because no one was interested. I'm too tired. I'd rather just drink. I'd rather just, sleep around. I'd rather do anything other than that. And a lot of people didn't know about podcasting. And so I had this big vision and no one to help me work on it. And so I went solo, and when I got out of the military, really lost my ties to the nuclear community. And it exists online. There's Facebook groups, different stuff. But I said, maybe I'll find a co-host one day. And it didn't happen. So I switched to military mental health, did that haphazardly every few weeks, maybe an episode, audio only, low quality. And then people kept niching me down as there's Mr. Whiskey, the military man for military men. But that wasn't who I was. I wanted to help more people. And I was never a military man. I was a man in the military. My parents, when I was 17, said, "You're doing this." It was never like my passion. Like, I've always respected, I still respect the men and women out there, but it wasn't my identity before I ever even joined. And at one point it was, and then the Navy ruined that. And that's a different podcast episode on its own. I'll tell you what, if you're a good sailor, people hate you. If you're a bad sailor, people hate you. You can never win, whatever branch it is. And so that's how the podcast really started as far as Mr. Whiskey, because I had started it while active duty. And there were a few episodes where it was me and other nukes talking about mental health, high suicide rate, addiction. It poorly reflected leadership. It wasn't an attack on leadership, but it was a truth. It was the truth about what was happening. However, you read the contract and stuff, and there's, if you make this person look bad, blah, blah, blah. So we said, I should do it anonymously. And that came the name Mr. Whiskey, because my real last name is Hennessy. So people were like, "Is that Hennessy?" "No, that's whiskey." And so it was just this joke of like changing my name by one letter, so to speak. And it was just, legally it worked, but and again, we were just sharing the truth. There's a lot of suicide in the military. There's a lot of depression, anxiety, PTSD, addiction, and a lot of it is the result of poor leadership. We had leaders call us government property, say we didn't have rights because we weren't ranked high enough. We had people say they didn't care how bad our lives were because we had it slightly better than when they first joined. When you have leadership like that, it causes mental health issues. It all ripples down. Every single person in the military has a ripple effect around them of the people's mental health around them, right? We all play a role, whether you're positive or whether you're negative. There's a lot of negativity vomit. There's a lot of, I hate my life, so I hate everyone here. I hate my life, so you're going to hate your life. My wife's not talking to me. We're going to field day for 2 more hours. We've all had that kind of experience once before, right? And so it was really God aligned when the podcast got to a point. I got this email from the hosting platform I use. They said, "Hey, there's this big conference called Podfest, and there's thousands of podcasters that gather." And my first thought was, there's conferences for these things? Like, do people, what? I didn't believe that at all. And so I was about to quit my job at this very toxic blue collar job, doing 12 to 14 hour rotating shift work, day and night shift in the same week on this constant rotation. And I talked to God. I said, "Listen, I'm not spending money and traveling out of state by myself for the first time to go to a conference of people who do this, but if you take me, I'll go." And I got an email that I had been handpicked for that company to pay for me to go. And from there, it was every time an event seemed too expensive or too far away, God would open a door. And every event I left, there had been a rainbow in the sky, covenantal promise. And so I've been on this path as long as God has guided me, and until he tells me to stop, puts a big skull cloud in the sky or something instead of a rainbow. If I ever leave a podcast conference and lightning strikes me, that's it. No, you're not going to see any more episodes from me. But it went from haphazardly every few weeks, these terrible quality episodes, to now I put out an episode every other day, been top of the charts in some degrees, and spoken on stage, traveling, podcasting with people in person in Japan right now. So it really is what I thought was like, people do this to, a lot of people do this. It's $1 billion industry and people are listening. And I had someone write in and say an episode of my show changed their life. So I've grown so much respect for how absolutely important this work is.
Just a mic drop. Bam. No, I wholeheartedly agree, man. And I'll tell you, the same thing occurred with us when we started VET S.O.S. The whole goal was just, if we help one person, the whole thing's worth it. And to hear that you have helped somebody or help, whether it's just find a resource or you change something in their life or whatever, it's just so heartwarming. And I love where your heart's at. So I listed off 10 different jobs that you do under a couple of nukes. How
Right.
did you get into all these different areas? Like what all, was there a resounding theme? Was it just interests? Was it callings? What do you see here?
For sure. So, the mission is simple: to serve God and others. And all the things that I do are just different forms of communication to reach more people. The comedy work that I do, I started comedy really in the military to help people who were really down. I would find these groups of sailors who were really down. And at the time, it was just terrible dating stories that cheered people up. But, those small boosts throughout the day can mean a lot. And it was a way, there's some people who can't have a very deep, heavy, serious conversation all the time. I can. I talk about homicide and suicide every day, all day. Doesn't bother me. But some people need the comedy aspect of it. Some people connect mostly through music. Some people connect through art. I had a woman that I got on a date with, she couldn't really express her feelings. She would draw me pictures to express her feelings. Everyone's a little bit different. And we've learned this as we've gone on about learning styles as well. So the way they've changed even school learning, some people are hands on, some people are, more audible, more visual. In the military, you're only allowed to learn by being yelled at and watching someone do it once, and now you know it. But, there are different learning styles for a reason. And so, the writing, the speaking, every opportunity that I pursue or that is offered to me, as long as it's in alignment with what I'm doing, I see as another chance to reach someone else. So the podcast guesting, the podcast hosting, it's all a chance to reach more people. Everyone reaches a different audience. That's why I say, I host mental health podcasts on my show all the time. I don't see them as competition. I see it as they're going to reach different people. If I can promote them and they connect better, then that's how it is. It's the same with preaching. There's a lot of different preaching styles out there. There's a lot of different show styles, book styles. And so for me, it's really just expanding. It's just a constant expansion of how many people can I reach through these different forms of communication.
I love the vision there of using all of these as a communication model. That's just fantastic, Keith.
Yeah.
Even all your
And
different podcasts reach different people. They're all overlap
sure.
themes to a degree, but they're all to reach a different audience of the same type of people.
Yeah. And with that, like your show covers so many different topics, and let's face it, some of them are dark or heavy, right? Suicide prevention,
Yeah.
addiction recovery, domestic and sexual violence, trafficking, right? These are some serious heavy hitters. So how do you design the conversations so that, they're being honest about that darkness, but they still kind of put people or pull people towards like hope and action?
That's really important, especially as a host of the conversation. It is my responsibility to make sure that message of hope is clear. And there have been episodes where I have to say, hey, this whole conversation has been pretty heavy and dark, but we are focused on recovery. So what is your message of hope? Or let's cultivate life lessons from this. And I always say that, it's really up to me as a host to make sure that happens. But a lot of the guests that I interview, that's their goal. They're sharing what they've been through to inspire. A lot of them, especially domestic violence survivors, are saying, hey, we're recovering loudly so others don't die quietly, because there's a lot that happens behind closed doors. There's a lot of people that you never know, and same with even suicide. I had people telling me they were suicidal. They were smiling at work, happy at work, good grades, girlfriend, beautiful family, whatever it was. It's all internal. So those conversations, extractivating it all in a way that is hopeful, is definitely very important. But I also keep it very real because people need to have this. We're so escapism focused. We want to just play video games or drink or have sex or scroll on social media and run from the news, run from the world. I think there's a balance. We have to embrace the truth and reality of it. And I think the more we talk about it, the easier it becomes. I think people are just living so sheltered and hiding so much that everything becomes so much more heavily weighted than it should be. And all these things are important and heavily weighted, but there is a layer of processing that we should all have and build up. We shouldn't just run from it always, because it is going to happen to someone in your life or you yourself at some point. In Ecclesiastes talks about, like, death is the end place of us all. It doesn't discriminate, right? So if you spend your whole life never going to any funerals because they're too sad or dark, never talking about it or never watching the news, at some point, it's going to happen. I think it's really important that we embrace those conversations, and every conversation can be one of recovery. There is always that angle. It's just a matter of, do you choose to see that or not? And some of us choose not to. We don't want to choose to see the recovery because we don't want to have to do the recovery.
Yeah.
Man,
And
he's dropping mics left and right.
right. You see why it's effective. So,
It's a 2-on-1 fight. I gotta hold my ground somehow.
there you're right. Oh, trust
You're
me,
doing just fine.
yeah, exactly. So when someone plugs into the podcast, or your community at large, kind of at their rock bottom, right? What's the first tangible lifeline that you want them to grab hold of, whether it be an episode, tool, step, whatever, that kind of gives them that momentum, rather than just more theory?
Yeah, so I don't have like a particular resource that I put forward that I say like this is what you need. What I put forward on my show more than anything is listen to yourself and don't get so caught up in everything that is traditional or mainstream, especially addiction recovery for one. Everyone will say, go to 12 steps, go to rehab. I have so many non-traditional episodes that say, hey, your mental health and your physical health, everything about your life, your spiritual health, it's individualized. And we have so many people trying to sell one size fits all. I've got a great episode coming up about physical fitness and health because so many fitness influencers, so, hey, this worked for me. Here's the results. You can see them. The issue is tangible results can be true, but that doesn't mean they're for us, and it's the same with mental health and addiction recovery. So I think what I want people to get the most from my conversation is I always emphasize, what do you need, and if you don't know what you need, how can you go about figuring that out? So I think that's the most important part, is listening to yourself. And we do all have this innate sense of what we need to do. Sometimes we're just scared to pursue it because of stigmas, or we're so focused and being inundated about, hey, this is the right way. This is the right way. But sometimes you don't need the way that's working for everyone else. You need what's going to work for you.
Yeah. What would you say to the folks that, because I've often heard it, and I'm of the mindset that you got to want the help, right? You got to, like, there's always that voice in the back of our mind telling us, hey, there's something wrong, like I'm drinking too much, or I'm abusing this, or I'm addicted to pornography, whatever it might be. Like, but at the same time, I've seen a lot of folks that they're clearly in that, but they just don't want the help. Like, what would you say to those folks that have that little voice in the back of their head, but you can tell they're just not quite ready to take that step yet?
Right. And this is so true. I've had people on my show who have different systems set up that can cure every physical need in your body that is saying we need alcohol or drugs. And it'll say you can still relapse if mentally you want it. And there's a huge difference between being dry and sober. And I found that out through my podcast. You can quit drinking, but not pursue anything else in your life or improve your life. That's the difference between dry and sober. If you're sober, you're living recovery rather than just, hey, I feel recovered, so now I'm just going to stop and flatline. Life should be exponential growth. And I think this is one of the hardest conversations to have because there's nothing ultimately that any of us on this call right now can say to convince someone to want it. And that's been the hardest part, me being, the son of a father who is addicted to drugs and alcohol. Every day I pray for him. Every day I have conversations with him about why he should stop. But ultimately he has to choose that, and that's for such a tough position for anyone. And it can be same. I've worked with people who were in a domestically abusive relationship, and you can give them all the reasons and they can say, yes, I agree. I'm going to go get help. And then you see the next day they say, you know what? I love him. I forgive him. So I think, unfortunately, reality I have to say to you is there's nothing I can say or anyone on this call can say ultimately to convince them. All we can do is hope that by continuing to have these conversations, something's going to sit with them and click with them.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah, and you nailed it on the head, right? Like, I love the fact that you illustrated, at least for alcohol, dry versus sober, and it's just, it is, I was a dry drunk for months, almost about 5 months before I got quote unquote sober, because I was not drinking and I was miserable and I hated everybody and I hated everything. And I was a miserable SOB. And it wasn't until I started doing these other things, because, the problem was me, right? The problem wasn't alcohol. The problem was me. I was the problem. And so I had to address a lot of the stuff internally that I wasn't willing to face earlier on. And once I did, and again, it was like, I remember not even thinking, because it wasn't like a conscious thought, but like there was this mental, like, what's the word I'm looking for? Like, I can't think of the word, but like this mental block almost. It was almost like my addiction was in self recovery, not or self preservation mode, right? And I didn't want to get better because it knew I knew what it meant, it knew what it could mean, and it knew I had to work on me, and that just seemed so hard, right? Like I can't figure me out. I just am the way I am, and it was baby steps, right? It's a journey, and you have to take it. Just start taking the small steps, and whether that's getting into a program. I mean, again, like you said, there's no one size fits all, but there are a lot of great programs out there that you shop around, find one that works for you. But they're all still, in the end of the day, focused on getting inside here, and I say that the most dangerous place in the world is between my two ears, and I don't want to go there at night alone. And going in there and getting things straightened out up there. Now I'm ranting. Sean, what do you think as a somewhat more recent member of our society?
I feel like we need to pull a couch up for you here, Keith.
I know, right?
Well, first of all, I don't know from your background as far as like education, and I say that because it sounds to me like nukes are very similar to my chosen profession of being an intel analyst in the military, and there's a lot of what I have seen in my particular MOS is there's a severe lack of people skills in a lot of ways, and being able to interpersonal communicate with somebody. You have a profound understanding of human nature and the purpose or the importance of communication and how all that works. So I'm really curious, is this just a natural skill that you have, or is this something that you've learned over time through your different ventures, or something that you pursued education in? Because you really do understand so many nuances when it comes to this, and I'm really, really impressed with it. So I'm just really curious, if you know
For
where that came
sure.
from.
Yeah, more than happy to answer that. And I want to address something real quick that Keith mentioned about, self accountability and responsibility is huge because you talked about, sometimes people make excuses. And one we've been hearing a lot is, oh, everyone in my family did this, or everyone in my community did this, or it's a generational curse. And a lot of people justify. And again, we know we can justify or excuse anything if we really wanted to. And so I think that self accountability and responsibility is saying, hey, I do have to work on me whether I want to or not, whether it's pretty or not, so I think that's really important. And then, Sean, for your question, it's interesting because I grew up in a household, one of domestic violence, sexual violence, addiction, verbal and emotional abuse, weaponized religion. Did a whole episode with you or your team on that one. And, growing up in that kind of household, I also had my friends and enemies picked for me, wasn't really allowed to leave the house, grew up with a very skewed perspective of New Jersey, of America, of the world. So I was completely introverted.
I
I
think
spent all
everybody
my
has a
time
skewed
locked away in my
perspective of New
room.
Jersey.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I thought it was like all of America in the greatest state, and it's not. I learned that the hard way. When I left for the military, flying out of Newark, New Jersey, the sky turned from gray to blue. Like there's they used to talk about the dome around Los Angeles. There's one in New Jersey too.
It absolutely is. Yep.
And yeah, that first breath of country air I ever took, as soon as I breathed in, this hat, popped up on my head actually. So,
Nice.
it's great. But I used to tell people in the military, they say, where are you from? And I would say, Jersey by birth, Southern by heart. Because I always had a Southern accent in New Jersey. People would say, where are you from? And I say, the South of New Jersey. Because that's how it was. But yeah, so I find it all ironic. You look at how I was raised and grew up, and, there's a lot of people who would have stayed in that. For me, it's interesting. That podcasting conference I went to was almost 3,000 people or more. And I met more people in a day than I had in my entire life. And everyone was asking about me and what I do. And it was ironic, no, I didn't really have an identity still. When growing up, I was this abused child that my identity was what my parents said and told me. Then they put me into the military where my identity was, petty officer so-and-so, or according to some people, government property with no rights because you're not high enough ranked so-and-so, And so unfortunately, that's how it was. So it was really overwhelming, that conference, but it really, and that same time they said, hey, get on stage and perform comedy, basically. And that was the first time I ever performed comedy. Was my first time ever traveling out of state, already meeting hundreds of people more than I ever met in my life, didn't know how to answer any of them. And now I'm on stage with my legs shaking and I'm like, all right, time to try to be funny, so it's been a life, but I'm very glad that I've grown into such a person, very grateful to God for it, because there are many people who would have stayed in that or gone into addiction or really just been shut off. And podcasting has certainly helped. Traveling internationally has certainly helped. I grew up never wanting to leave the house. Now I've been in Japan for 2.5 months, traveling around, doing podcasts with strangers, traveling around. I spent all day today with a person who didn't even speak English, trying to use ChatGPT to translate, and they just send me the Japanese. Instead of turning it into English, they just add emojis to it so I can try to figure out what it means with the emojis, because that's helpful. So I'm very grateful, and I really encourage anyone who's grown up, being told what their dreams are, what their identity is, what their lives are. My mom told me that I would die alone, that no one would ever want to hear my story, that I'd never write a good book, that I'd never contribute anything, that I would be a bum and unloved and outcasted my whole life. And it's so interesting because, I've been on over 70 podcasts. I've spoken on stage and stuff. Everything she said was the opposite, but it very well could have been true if I took that to heart, and I'm very grateful to God that there has been so many opportunities, but I also pursue a lot of opportunities. And both military side and here, it's about how much are you willing to sacrifice too. I'll give you an example. A lot of nuclear operators were behind the qualification standard. A lot of them were at risk for failing out of the program. Most people did fail out of the program. I was one of only like 5 people who made it out of my original class, and it wasn't about the mental health necessarily or anything that was difficult. It was about your work ethic. And I'll give you an example. I begged and networked and arranged for a meeting with an officer very early in the morning. He said, I'll give you 15 minutes of my time to do these trainings, and I won't be available again for 6 months. Personal favor, I went and gathered all these people. I said, hey, tag along with me to get this training too. And they all said, nah, it's too early. I'd rather eat breakfast, or I'm just going to, hang out. I don't feel like doing it. I'll just wait till 6 months from now. You have to be willing to skip a meal? Don't skip every meal, but well worth it. Same with podcasting. I wake up in the middle of the night to be on shows in Africa and India. Sometimes I have a rough schedule, but it's about what are you willing to put in, same with physical fitness, with your mental health, with your gym, with addiction. And unfortunately, it's getting worse and worse because people are lazier and lazier. Their attention span is declining. They're so, click and grab and buy. And it's really sad, So I've had to work at this. It wasn't I just woke up and now I could talk to everyone. Every time I've spoken on stage, it has gotten better. Every podcast I've guested on, it's gotten better. I can go back and listen to old episodes and want to, cut my ears out and act like, I'm sure you two relate, podcasting. It's like you learn along the way.
Yeah.
You have to start first. And a lot of people don't want to start. They just want to wake up at the finish line.
Another mic drop. I mean, yeah, it's absolutely true. And one of my favorite phrases is never ask directions from someone who's never been there, and it's just, you're going to get better over time, and you can't skip the whole journey. The journey is what gets you to where you are. So,
and you can't
man, I
buy
absolutely loved it. And you're doing fantastic at it, man. Keep learning, keep doing. I know, you told us the story of, the things your mother said to you. And I just want you to hear it from me, man, brother, we love you. We appreciate you. And we love all the work you're doing. So keep it up.
Thank you.
You're making
Thank
a
you.
huge impact, and just so excited you joined us today.
Yeah, absolutely. Second that, I can never imagine a parent. I can't imagine as a parent ever saying, but you know, things happen, and yeah, you're not living out that self-fulfilled prophecy. You're making your own journey. Seemingly, it sounds like in the will of God. So that's the best place to be is in His will. So. So before we close, because we are at time, Mr. Whiskey, I just want to ask you, how do folks reach out to you? How do they connect with you, either with your podcast or if they want to get beyond the podcast or whatever it might be?
Yeah, just throw a bolt of lightning into the sky. No, so coupleofnukes.com. That's COUPLEONUKES, coupleofnukes.com. That has my podcast. Not only does it have it, but every episode is broken into a category for you to find exactly what you're trying to work on. Every guest who's ever been on my show and all of their resources, every show I've ever been on and their links, and then stuff for writing, comedy, preaching. Really, the website is set up to be a treasure trove and plethora of free resources for people to go and walk away a little more improved, or to share that knowledge with someone else. I think that's one of the most important things, is that we share and connect and spread all of this knowledge and serve one another.
Yeah. Beautiful. And thank you so much for all that you're doing for the community. And thank you for coming on the show. It was great having you, and continue doing all the amazing things that you're doing. And on behalf of the entire VET S.O.S family, we want to thank everyone for spending their time with us today. It's always great having you all along for the ride. And don't forget to check out all of our other episodes and keep coming back for more stories, insight, and support from the VET S.O.S crew. If you enjoyed this episode, give us a follow, share the show, and tell a friend or two. Toss your battle buddies, fire team, shipmates, and wingmen that flotation device that they need in transition, so no one drowns in that sea of transition. And as always, grab the VET S.O.S Lifeline.